Alright, so the deck I'm going to be playing today is a Jeskai mid-range, or Jeskai Mantis Rider, essentially. It's a little bit similar to the Jeskai decks we saw pop up in the last standard format before Battle of Zendikar was released, where we just had these straight three-color Jeskai decks based around Mantis Rider, and they weren't really splashing for black, which has kind of become the norm now. Most of these types of decks will see a Crackling Doom or a reason to splash, and I can understand that. There's a lot of incentives to be four colors because of the fetch land, battle land mana bases, but right now I actually don't think that there's a ton of black cards that are that great. Crackling Doom is a little worse right now, in my opinion. And looking at this mana base, you see that there's not. It's just relatively straightforward. We've got two creature lands here, and then the tap lands we get to play, and then we are playing one off-color battle land, Smoldering Marsh, just because we want to be able to fetch for red mana with our Polluted Deltas. And Polluted Delta is actually the best fetch land in the deck, even though you would think Flooded Strand would be better because it can fetch island or plains. Polluted Delta can fetch a Prairie Stream or a Smoldering Marsh, so you'd actually rather have Deltas. Sometimes you'll have hands with Flooded Strand, Island, Plains, and it's kind of awkward, so yeah, Polluted Delta is nice, but the mana base is pretty solid. Just staying three colors, you're a little bit more consistent, and looking at the spells, we're not really losing a lot as far as power goes. Fiery Impulse is pretty standard, playing four of those. We've pretty much determined in this format that Impulse is better than Wild Slash in general. And then looking at our two drops, we have both Jace Vryn's Prodigy. Yes, I know it's an expensive 2-mana blue creature, but it's in a lot of decks, and this one really can take full advantage of Jace, as there's plenty of instants you can flash back with it, whether it's a removal spell, or you can also Ojutai's Command back Jace, and that's one of the key interactions of the deck. Not too many Jeskai decks right now are actually playing Ojutai's Command, which I think is kind of a crime, considering how good it is with Soulfire and Jace. Bringing back Jace is just insane whenever that happens with Ojutai's Command. And then we've got kind of an interesting mix of 2-mana removal spells and counter spells here. Valorous Stance is a card that is also not seeing as much play as it used to, but being able to get rid of cards like Goblin Dark Dwellers and Rhino, of course, Anafenza, or just save one of your own creatures. Most people don't necessarily see giving one of your creatures indestructible coming, so that's kind of the secret mode of Valorous Stance that I like. It does get boarded out in a reasonable amount of matchups, though. And then there's two main deck Disdainful Strokes. Most blue decks right now actually have Disdainful Strokes in the board, but here we see a couple of them in the main deck, and this card is really important right now, considering how much ramp is in the format and how important the big mana spells are. And so I don't mind actually main decking a couple Disdainful Strokes. They've been pretty good. And then rounding out our 2-mana spells, we have Roast as just another catch-all against big creatures, whether it's Thought-Knot, Rhino, stuff like that. And looking at our 3-drop slot, we of course have the signature card of this deck, and the reason to play this deck is Mantis Rider. I think it's actually, the format's gone full circle, and Mantis Rider is actually good again. Now that there's these non-interactive decks, as I mentioned, decks like Ramp, or maybe even a Bant Company deck, or Rally, there's very few ways to answer Mantis Rider, and so a 3/3 haste creature is already great, but when you tack on Vigilance and Flying, some decks just don't have any flyers, and this is one of the best ways to get a clock on your opponent with just one card. You don't have to have additional threats on the board. 3 damage a turn is normally enough to get the job done. So huge fan of Mantis Rider here. And then we've got 3 copies of Jeskai Charm. This may stand out to some people because it's not a card we see typically played in Jeskai decks, but I've liked it. Just being able to time ebb an opposing creature to the top of their deck, or 4 damage can go after a Planeswalker, which is nice. It can go to your opponent's face, and then of course the lifelink mode. It's just a versatile card, so it's been pretty nice. Monastery Mentor is basically it's the second best 3-mana creature available to us. Mantis Rider is the best one, but we want something else. Mentor has the potential to take over a game if you go Monastery Mentor and follow it up with a removal spell like Roast or Fiery Impulse in the same turn. You've already gotten value by making a creature, or you can just curve Monastery Mentor into one of your 4-mana plays. We see 2 copies of Gideon, Ally of Zendikar. Sweet Planeswalkers at the top of our curve. We don't want 4 Gideon in this deck, but having Planeswalkers as threats sort of diversifies what we're trying to do as far as attacking our opponent. And if we're playing against a deck with a lot of creature removal, we really want to be able to play Gideon and put our opponent into a tough spot. PN Kirin is another way of going wide. This creature has really surged in popularity lately, and it's pretty much arguable you can put PN Kirin in any red mid-rangey type deck, and here it's perfect. And you see another one in the board. Already talked a little bit about Ojutai's Command, but this deck is all about versatility. Commands and charms really let us transform our game plan and decide however we want to attack an opposing matchup. And then 1 copy of Sarkhan. Looking down the mana curve, we've also got 3 copies of Dig Through Time. So let's move them over a little bit. And then this is kind of our card advantage. We don't have a ton of card advantage in this deck, but Dig is one of the best card advantage options in the format, and it actually isn't being played right now as much as it probably should be. This is one deck that can play it. There's enough blue sources that a lot of times you are going to have double blue, and with a bunch of fetch lands and cheap spells, it's pretty easy to turn on the Delve and make this like a 4-mana instant, a 3-mana instant, even a 2-mana instant, and find exactly what we need in a given game. So it's definitely possible to get us out of some tight spots. So pretty happy with the main deck. Looking at the sideboard, we've got a couple counter spells starting with Dispel. Pretty typical. Any blue mid-range deck these days typically has Dispel on the sideboard. 2 is a pretty good number. You don't want a ton because you're normally going after specific instants like Collected Company or Rally the Ancestors. So you don't want to draw too many, but having a couple that you can find is pretty sweet. And then an additional Disdainful Stroke and Roast and Valorous Dance, kind of more of the same cards we've already seen in the main deck, but we have additional we can bring in specific matchups. And then 2 copies of Mastery Unseen. Mastery of the Unseen is a card that is really good in the late game and against the super controlling decks. There aren't a ton of them in the format, but it can really shine since we don't have a ton of card advantage as just a way to break the game open. And so looking towards the rest of our sideboard, 4 copies of Irrational Cleric, pretty typical as a way to stop the red decks from doing what they want to do. And we can also, if we want to, bring Irrational Cleric back with Ojutai's Command. So it's pretty much our best anti-aggro sideboard creature we have access to. And then we've got 3 copies of Radiant Flames. We see these go wide, like a Tarka token style decks, and that's where the Radiant Flames really shine. And then one more copy of Pia and Kieran Nalaar. So overall, the deck's been good for me. I'm excited to play with Mantis Rider again, and I really don't like playing these 4-color decks if I can avoid it, and I'm not sure right now the incentives are there, so looking forward to trying this deck out.